What we need to have in place for multifamily is a set of defined operations. You need to have your stuff together because you can't just walk into a broker and just start kind of fumbling around.
Hi everyone, welcome to this episode of the Immigrant Doctor Podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Avishkar Sabharwal, the Immigrant Doctor, and I have with me Drew Clayton. He's actually one of my partners in this team that we work in to acquire multifamily assets in the Midwest. And I wanted to bring him on because he kind of runs the show as far as our team meetings go. He's kind of like the chief integrator for our team, and he's amazing at that. I could never do what he does, and that's why I have him on the show today to discuss about some of the challenges that we faced in the last year, how he got started in multifamily, how he changed his vision around multifamily, and we're going to go into a little bit of a discussion, kind of discussing how we've grown as a team. So welcome, Drew. Thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, Avishkar, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, so let's just dive into this. Tell me more about when you had started. I think when we had met, it was more than a year, I think a year and a half ago, or probably longer than that.
It was probably 2 years. We were both still focused on smaller properties at the time, didn't really know exactly where we wanted to go. And it was just kind of a casual, introduction that we had through Sub 2.
Yeah, absolutely. And we were kind of focused on multifamily, but then we were looking at the smaller assets and something changed. And I want to know about that because what really clicked for you that made you kind of pivot towards these larger assets that we're looking at now?
Yeah. Thinking back on that first conversation you and I ever had one-on-one, just like, hi, what do you focus on? I was very much like, I've got this roadmap. I'm going to acquire 30, smaller properties in the next couple of years, and that'll put me at this level of income. Then I can do this, and then I can do that. Somewhere in the back of my head, I thought someday, once I've achieved a bunch down here at the smaller property level, I want to go multifamily. I have no idea what that looks like. I have no idea even how to get started. I think we're already talking about it a little bit. You're like, yeah, no, I'd really love to do bigger properties at some point. But yeah, I think we were both in a position at that time of just like, I don't know, where do you even start? But for me, I mean, my background is in corporate America. I'm used to like very like structured group, giant projects, tons of people working together toward a common goal, and a lot of the process and structure that is required to make that happen. And man, I will tell you, when I was fiddling around with like trying to acquire a property here and a property there, and then oversee the renovations and the property management from out of state, no less, it was driving me crazy. And it just, the more and more I was doing, it was taking up so much of my time. It was battling against my day job. It was battling against any free time I had, and the gains that I was making, the feeling even of any kind of progress was so minimal for the insane amount of work I was putting in. And long story short, I essentially said, okay, for the like, I use that Reps Tracker program to track my real estate hours. I surpassed the 750 hours of material participation, or 500 material participation, 250 hours last year. And what do I have to show for it? I completed 2 renovations on 2 properties, and then fiddled around with a short-term rental and a couple other things. And I'm like, oh my gosh, for that many hours, had I applied that to a 100-unit building, I could have spent probably less time, to be honest, and had 100 units at the end of that. So
yeah, I think, we know what we know and we don't know what we don't know. And I think that's what happened when we had started talking. I'll talk about, I'll share my journey, because I think this was the same thing. When I had started, I was so focused on these smaller assets because I had no clue how these larger assets work, and how do you actually underwrite them, how do you acquire them, what do you need to do for them. It is kind of similar to acquiring smaller assets, but I had it in my mind that I wanted to kind of always scale to larger assets. And it's really about dealing with larger number of doors, larger properties, and of course that means you're looking at proportionally, you're looking at in the absolute dollar value, you're looking at larger profits as well, and you're looking at operating at scale. The challenge was I did not know how to do that. And the other challenge was finding the team. And one of the things that I struggled with when I was beginning, and I'm sure a lot of people struggle with as well, is giving away that control. Because when I own a small asset, I control the asset in the sense that I know what material is going to go in. I know I've run my numbers. I know which property management to choose. I know how to do all of that stuff because I'm controlling all of that stuff, right? But when it comes to these larger assets, there's a team at work. I could not have possibly done that alone, right? I have a full-time job as a physician, which needs my attention, right? And then on top of that, I have to do this. So it obviously requires a team, and I don't know of anybody that does this without a team. And so I think the biggest shift that occurred for me was the shift in the mindset to an abundance mindset. Let's talk a little bit about that. And I want to know from your perspective, how did your mindset shift when you started looking at larger assets?
Yeah, I think to me, it just came back to that time invested for a return on the time. We could talk about the investment of money as well and the return on that, but really for me I was entirely focused on the amount of effort I have. I was not, and still am not, in a position to do any of this full time, so I have to be really strategic. And I thought, okay, looking back at the last year, the last 3 years that I've been doing smaller properties, I'm 3 years in, I had this roadmap. And I've got 5 properties to show for it. Not what I expected. So the shift in what can I do with the same amount of time that'll have greater returns led me to the multifamily space. And I was actually, the funny thing is, the two sectors are so different. And I think the people you meet in those two sectors are so different. In smaller properties, people who are buying single families and duplexes, and the people who are buying and thinking about 100, 200, 800 unit complexes have to have a very different view of the what is available, right? It's even just down to how you underwrite and make offers. When you're trying to acquire a property at a time, you are sending multiple offers every day. We in multifamily are reviewing things every day. We're underwriting, but the amount of times we actually send out an LOI, because it's so much more difficult, we are so strategic and is based on any number of criteria. You have to have built a relationship with your broker and with your lenders and investors and insurance adjusters and all these things that you move in a different flow, a different pattern, but the moves you make are so much more impactful. And that just spoke to me. That felt more strategic. It speaks to my kind of corporate upbringing, so to speak. And the whole thing, honestly, just feels more structured.
So, Drew, that was the shift that occurred for me in terms of, shifting my mindset from that of sort of the scarcity mindset to the abundance mindset, where I could go in and create a bigger pie by getting more people in and doing larger and larger projects. I'm just curious, what was the shift for you in your mindset, that caused you to pivot from these smaller assets to these larger assets?
Yeah, scarcity and abundance. I think the first thing I was looking at was just the return on time, right? If I have the same amount of time to spend on whatever project per day, what I was getting out of the smaller properties was, let's say this much. And I just did the calculation of, oh my gosh, if I just spent enough to be a real estate professional from a tax perspective last year, but only ended up with 5 properties, I could spend that same amount of time and take down a large multifamily property and end up with hundreds of properties, or hundreds of units at the end of the year. And I think it comes down to even just how you look at the process of acquiring and managing properties. When you're operating on a small scale with small properties, you're sending out multiple offers a day a lot of the time, because you're just trying to like spray and pray, get as many as you can, hope they work out, and operate off of scale. Whereas, again, with that sort of large scale multifamily asset class, you're thinking in terms of the quality rather than the quantity. And you can do so much more with a really well selected asset, as well as a really well selected team and vendors. And it's really about approaching the whole thing in a relationship status. Who am I working with? Who are going to be my general partners in this? Who are going to be my property management, my contractor? You're making those decisions at the smaller scale as well, but because it is more of a, I got to get it done, and I got to get it done so fast because I've got this, I need to have 100 properties to be able to replace my W-2 income. You'll take kind of whatever you can get sometimes. And that's not the case here, because we don't have the luxury of taking whatever we can get. We have to be so strategic and selective.
Yeah, I think, the other thing is that the focus changes, right? When you're acquiring a property for yourself, your primary focus is what's in it for you. But when we start looking at these larger assets, we have these investors at play, right? They are going to come into these assets. They're going to be investing with us as our limited partners. And really what I found was that the focus at that point changes to what would fit my investors' buy box, what would meet their requirements so that I can help them deploy their capital in a way that makes sense for them. And I think that was a big shift that occurred for me as well. But let's talk about, the internal dynamics of a team, because when you're doing these smaller assets, you're the end all be all, you have the entire control, right? And we had our challenges within our team as well. We had a lot of meetings, a lot of stuff that we had to go through to kind of come to a point where we are now, where we deeply trust each other and we make sure that we're working in a very well aligned fashion. So I would like to talk to you about that and understand from your perspective, how was that journey for you?
Yeah, I think that's one of the other things, honestly, that's really attracted me to the multifamily space is not just the ability, but the requirement that you have partners. I know a lot of multifamily teams are 2 people, or some like us are 3 or 4. But the necessity to find people who fill the gaps in what you bring to the table and allow you in return to bring something that is your superpower that you can contribute, and then make sure that collectively you are creating this super team is so compelling to me, and again speaks to my where I come from in the corporate world. There's no one created Apple off of like one person. I'm sorry, Steve Jobs was not himself Apple, right? He was no one without Steve Wozniak and an army of amazing engineers and marketers. So when we were getting together, it was a couple of us at a time, then we added on someone, then we added on someone else, and it was, hey, I have this to offer. And you said, oh, well, that's perfect. I need that. And also I can offer this. And I was like, sweet, let's, that fits my gap. Let's work together. And then from there, it was, I think, establishing, okay, what are the rules for how we work together? What is our, not just process, but what are our values? How do we show up to each other? How do we, deal with conflict resolution? How do we celebrate our wins? And, thankfully, through a lot of just interviews and time together, we identified that, yes, this works, and we're willing to commit to each other a certain level of excellence.
Yeah, I think, and even before that, right, even before we went to that phase of, how do we tackle conflicts and how do we celebrate our wins, I think even before that, we were talking about our big vision as a team, right? And I think we spent so much time developing our vision. And I remember, all of us sitting down, brainstorming, okay, what do we want in our vision? We got to be aligned, because here's the thing, and this is what I learned through this process, was that in a team, you may have your individual superpowers, but if everybody is not aligned to one common vision or one common goal, you're not going to achieve that. And I think that's where the groundwork started for us, was spending hours and spending days and weeks figuring out, and we were evolving our vision even like till, a few months ago, we were changing that to kind of figure out. And I think it just goes to show that it's an iterative process where, you have whatever information you have, you create something with that, and then you get new data and you get new information, and then you change that a little bit, and you change that a little bit till you get to something that all the people involved are completely aligned with and are focused on.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you remember, we talked to a few people when we were considering whether they should be part of our team, whether we were going to work well together, where we just talked about our needs and expectations, right? From even a monetary standpoint, what do you want to get out of this? What are you hoping to get out of this? And for, let's say, you, me, and Andrea, we had this farther out vision, right? We are willing to go without, potentially getting paid for the first year or two, as we're waiting to get that first property, then stabilizing it, and then eventually getting distributions. Whereas we met other people who were like, how soon do I get something? And they were so like, it's not a judgment thing. It's not a morality thing. It's for what they needed in their lives. They needed more immediate income. And we just said, that's not going to work with where we're going. And so it was an easy opportunity to say, all the best to you, but this is not a good fit.
Yeah, and I think that's been a growing process for me, because I have grown internally working with you and working with Andrea, because I have not been in a situation or in a position where I've had to have those conversations about actually creating a vision for a team, actually sitting down and figuring out what are the specific responsibilities that are going to be for each individual. And I think I would say part of it was luck, and part of it was the effort that we all put into this to understand what our individual personalities are. And I've always maintained this, it all starts with your personality, how you come across to the other person, and what are your strengths in your personality that kind of have to complement with the other person's personality. And that's where the team formation starts, right? That's where you start, not with what skill sets you have, but what is your personality like? What do you really enjoy on the inside, doing what's going to give you that energy to go the extra mile when things get hard?
Yeah, and I've always appreciated that about our group, is that even when we're in like more casual moments, like if we go out to a team dinner or something like that, just how we talk about what we're doing, we share that same level of excitement, because we share that farther out vision of like, hey, not just what does this mean to us and our families, which I think we all had that was a very important part early on, that we identified like, oh, here's what I'm trying to achieve for the sake of my family or for my community, whatever that is. But what we could make our group into, and what we could represent to the wider investment community, and what we could represent to the actual people living in our buildings, like creating quality housing, uplifting neighborhoods, improving living conditions. Like that's all fantastic stuff that got us really excited. And I think when you share not just like a goal, but actually a passion, that next levels a group dynamic and the actual reliance and anticipation of working together.
No, absolutely, 100%. And that's why when I had met Brandy, by the way, guys, if you don't know, we have a fourth partner, Brandy. We had recently onboarded her. It was actually weeks of discussion. And even before that discussion, I had met her, and I knew that her personality would align with what we're doing. And even if I knew that, I'm not trying to brag here, but even if I knew that, it still took us a lot of discussions to understand what her goals were, because I knew that she would be a good person to talk to, but I think it was also about understanding what her visions are, what her vision is, where is she trying to go in her life, and seeing if we align in those things or not, seeing if whatever skill set she has is going to be a good fit for our team or not. And I'm very happy that, after all of those discussions and multiple back and forth, like we have so well aligned that she's become an integral part of our group.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, like, obviously, just to dip into our roles and responsibilities really quick, and shout out to Veena Jetty, who, if you're a part of her community, makes available this really great spreadsheet of basic roles and responsibilities and how to actually assign things. Creating just a document ahead of time sets the expectations of everyone in the team, so that down the road there's never a wait a minute, oh, I thought that was your job, oh, it's mine, oh, I didn't realize. Like, there's none of that. There is purely a, hey, let's we all agree and we know what to depend on from each other. And then if there are any unfilled spaces that are like, oh shoot, none of us have that specific skill or want to take the thing, it becomes a discussion. Okay, who needs to learn it? Who needs to step up and volunteer and grab that thing? And then if there's ever, as you're going through process, you're acquiring or operating, and something new comes up, you add it in. But it's a continuously evolving understanding, and it is all about transparency. It is about maintaining expectations. And I think the number one way in any group, any kind of relationship, to maintain a strong connection is having clearly set, defined expectations.
Drew, there's one more thing that I just remembered that we did, which was, I think, very critical into the way we align with each other. And that was understanding the end that will be there, right? And what I mean by that is the partnership, and this actually goes back to what Veena had told us, that's how she had structured, and I really respected that, because that really started the hard conversations, right? Okay, what if we were to split? How would that look, right? These conversations happened before there was any money on the line, right? We had those conversations, so there was no money involved. It was purely us as persons, as humans, talking with our personalities coming to the front, right? Understanding whether we align on those difficult terms or not, right? Okay, what would the end look like? How do we structure it in a way that it's respectable to each person involved? Because at some point in time, there's going to be an end, right? Either we're going to move apart from each other. And I'm not saying that that's going to happen right now. I'm just saying that things change in life, that we may never move apart, but at some point in time, there's going to be a terminal event, right? Whether somebody dies, whether somebody moves apart, their worldview changes, their interests change, right? So we had those hard discussions well in advance before we had anything under contract. And I think when somebody's starting a new project, a lot of times these are kind of brushed under the carpet, because these conversations are difficult conversations, and you're working on an exciting new project, and it doesn't seem right to have those conversations. But I think that's exactly the time where you need to have these tough, difficult conversations to understand where do we stand on that. Because if there's going to be a difference of opinion on those grounds or on those hard topics, right from the get-go, it's going to get a whole lot worse when you actually have that event happen.
Yeah, we're all dating, and this is the time to figure out how we operate together, because little things that come up when you're getting to know someone only get amplified when you're in a deeper relationship, right? When you get married, if there were little things that were a concern, they're going to be amplified, right? And when we get into operating a property together, it is so much more amplified, again, because there's so much more riding on it. It matters more. So being really healthy going in and saying, let's lay our cards on the table and talk about really challenging questions and just put it out there, it covers you on the back end, down the road so much better. Again, it comes back to expectations, understanding where someone's coming from, what they expect from you, what your obligations are in return to them.
Guys, if you haven't done already, please go check out my free video series on how to do due diligence on operators and on deals before investing in them. It's called Real Estate RX for Passive Investors, and it's available at www.rerxcourse.com.